Hey, GCC Online, I am so glad that you've logged in and joined us today. We are in the fourth week of a series called Wage War. And over the past several weeks, we've been talking about the fact that most of us go through life and don't really pay attention to the fact that whether we want to admit it or not, we're actually in a war. Now, this isn't a war that's happening between two countries. This is a war for the hearts and minds of people. It's a war between the forces of good and evil. It's a war for a better life than what this world offers. And the question that we all have to wrestle with is this: are we willing to dig in and fight for the better life that God truly wants for our lives? See, many of you know that I am a lover of all things peanut butter. However, there's something else that ranks right up there with my love for peanut butter, and it's these things right here: Little Debbie oatmeal cream pies. Ever since I was a kid, if you put this in front of me, I have very little, if any, self-control. I mean, there is no way that I can just eat one of these once I start. Now, I don't know what your Little Debbie oatmeal cream pie is. It might be Diet Mountain Dew or coffee. Maybe it's purses or jeans, golf clubs or guns, video games or comic books. I really don't know what it is. But what I do know is this: each and every one of us have at least one guilty pleasure. There's one thing, when it's put in front of us, man, we have a hard time walking away from it, right? Well, if you're tuning in right now, I want you to put in the chat what that is for you. What is it that you have a hard time walking away from when somebody puts it under your nose? Ready? Go. I don't know if you saw this or not, but back in May of last year, People.com posted a story and a picture of a Starbucks barista who shared a complicated order that sparked a fire on Twitter, with many other Starbucks employees chiming in on the platform with photos and stories of their experience with insane customer requests. Now, here's a picture that this barista shared of the order that he received. It's a photo of an iced coffee drink with a comically long list of special requests, including but not limited to caramel drizzle, caramel sauce, caramel crunch, honey blend, extra whipped cream, extra ice, extra frap chips, and cinnamon toppings, just to name a few. Now, what's interesting is Starbucks actually got in on this and commented. They say customizing beverages at Starbucks and our barista's expertise in helping customers find and craft the right beverage has always and will always be the heart of the Starbucks experience. Interesting, right? Well, Starbucks has long been known for their not-so-secret menu. They actually boast that there's about 170,000 ways to customize a beverage. Who knew, right? They said, we want to create a favorite drink that fits the individual's lifestyle. We want to create a special drink that fits the individual's lifestyle. Remember that for just a moment. Now hear me. I am not against people ordering what they want at Starbucks, even though the order was kind of comical. It's not bad at all. However, it illustrates something that I think we really need to think about, and more importantly, we need to wage war on. It's called an appetite, okay? And there are all kinds of appetites in life: progress, acceptance, responsibility, fame, respect, recognition, winning, the loving of things. And here's the good news and the bad news. These appetites, they're never, ever going to go away. See, every one of these appetites have legitimate or appropriate expression. However, they also have the capacity to be warped and, in effect, ultimately warp us. See, God created every appetite for good, yet sin comes along and distorts them all. And every one of us has an appetite or appetites that, if not kept in check, can and ultimately will make a mess of our lives. Now, here's what I want you to really think about as we dig in this morning. You will either rule your appetite or it will rule you. You'll either rule your appetite or it will ultimately rule you. And something each of us needs to know is temptation isn't just something that attacks us out there somewhere in the world. Temptation can affect us right here, right in our heart, because that's what it is. It's a matter of the heart. As a matter of fact, James records in James chapter 1, verse 14, temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. See, temptation is tempting because you and I have appetites that have the potential to be exploited by our enemy. And that gets back to what we were talking about with that drink, when we want things our way all the time, all right? When we need God to redeem us and to teach us how to manage and master these appetites. And we have to be willing to dig in our heels and to wage war on this because it is ultimately important. And if we're honest, most every one of us has this subconscious desire that we want to achieve success, and we also want to satisfy this weird desire for more material possessions. And I think all of us are guilty of this. And the danger in this is we tend to measure our success by the stuff we possess or the stuff that we're working for currently. Steve Farrar, in his book, Overcoming Overload, actually calls this affluenza, great term, right? Which is a chronic lack of contentment and an insatiable drive to be successful, always reaching for more and more, despite what we already have. See, now, there's this spiritual issue that lies beneath the surface of affluenza. This issue is not new, okay? It's been part of humanity from the very beginning. And inside of all of us, after sin entered the world, is a brokenness. And again, the Bible calls it sin, right? And our souls were created in the image of God, but they've been distorted because of sin. See, we were meant to desire God, but we've turned that desire towards stuff instead. We were meant to find our security in God, but we find it now oftentimes in amassing wealth. We were meant to love and to bless people, but instead now we find ourselves oftentimes competing with them. We were meant to enjoy the simple pleasures of life, but we busy ourselves with pursuing money and things. See, we were meant to be generous and to share with those in need, but oftentimes we selfishly hoard our resources for ourselves. See, there's a sin nature within all of us, and we're living lives ultimately without meaning, and we're slaves to sin. And that's what's wrong with us. I'm not suggesting that all consumption is wrong, because it's not. I'm not saying I am saying, though, that we have taken something that was meant to be enjoyed, okay? And it was meant to be enjoyed one way, and we've now made it the central focus of our lives, and we've surrendered ultimately to the sin nature within us. And Jesus reminds us in John chapter 10, verse 10, that the thief, his purpose is to steal and to kill and destroy. And Jesus then says, but my purpose is to give them, that's you and I, a rich and satisfying life. And in order for that to happen, we have to wage war. See, I find that the devil plays upon these weaknesses in our souls. His delight is to undermine our effectiveness as Christ's people, replacing our joy ultimately with misery. And a lot of times we don't see it. See, Satan doesn't need to tempt you with drugs or to steal something or to have an extramarital affair in order to absolutely destroy you. All he needs to do is to convince you, for you to try and keep up with the Joneses, to borrow against your future, to enjoy more than you can afford in the present, to indulge yourself just a little bit more than what you are right now. And by doing that, he ultimately will rob you of your joy, and he will make you a slave and keep you from doing God's will. Why does he make you a slave? Because when you're in debt, that's what you do. You end up working all of these hours and all of this extra work to pay for something that you had to go in debt over. As a matter of fact, Solomon writes about this in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 7. He says, just as the rich rule the poor, so the borrower is servant to the lender. It's interesting because several translations actually translate that passage, the borrower is slave to the lender. And here's what the devil knows. If he can get you in debt, he can make you a slave. If he can convince you to spend all that you have, you'll never offer your tithes to God. You will never help the poor as you could have. You will never use what you do have to accomplish God's purpose. And if he can tempt you to become a slave to creditors, then you will never know simplicity, generosity, or joy. See, he will have neutralized your effectiveness for the kingdom and will have successfully choked the gospel out of your life. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that money and things are bad. We all need food and shelter. We all need and have need for and have savings for retirement and things later in life. See, not having adequate finances actually is a terrible thing. And God does not want us to be penniless. And hear me, I think this is incredibly important. I don't believe stuff is bad, but spending our lives acquiring more and more stuff that we actually don't need, not slowing down and enjoying what we do have. Because what happens is if we just start chasing stuff, it's never enough. And it's ultimately not what matters most. And that brings us to Luke chapter 12. Okay? In Luke chapter 12, there's a scene with Jesus and some people, and there's an inheritance dispute that's happening, and it starts in verse 13. Come with me, and let's talk it through and look at it. In verse 13, it says, "Then someone called from the crowd, 'Teacher,'" they're talking to Jesus, "please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." Now, few things in life are as ugly as families fighting over the estate of a loved one who's passed away, right? And Jesus refused to get sucked into this fight. Look at verses 14 and 15. Jesus replies, "Friend, who made me judge over you to decide such things as that?" Then he said, "Beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own." And then Jesus told a really interesting story starting in verse 16. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. And he said to himself, "What should I do? I don't have room for all of my crops." And then he said, "I know, I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. Then I'll have room enough, to store all of my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and I'll say to myself, 'My friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry.'" In his book, When the Game is Over, John Ortberg actually talks about this man in Luke 12. And he said this man had a life plan that included the following: harvest large crops, build bigger barns, acquire more stuff, achieve financial security, eat, drink, and be merry. Sounds good, right? And remember not to die. That's the part maybe he didn't think through. See, of course, the last part of the plan was hard to pull off because every one of us faced death. See, none of us are going to be able to avoid our own funeral. And despite his plan to build bigger barns and to acquire more stuff, this man inconveniently died. And when he did, notice what God called him in verse 21 of Luke 12. "But God said to him, 'You fool, you will die this very night.'" Okay? "You will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for?" Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. See, when we make money and stuff the center of our lives, and in the process neglect God and others, then we are, by God's definition, fools. See, Solomon, the wisest man to ever live, gave us a warning in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10. He says, "Those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness." See, if too much of our energy, if too much of our thoughts, if too much of our heart's desire is focused on the pleasures of ourself, then there's nothing left for God to use for his kingdom and ultimately for his glory. Now, I want to be real with you. Not too many of you are thinking about the things of God while creditors are calling and bills are showing up on your kitchen table, are you? See, we can't experience the blessings and the joy that come from giving freely to things that matter when we're buried in debt. Now, I want to share a story. It's the story of DJ and Aaron. Okay? They're part of our GCC family, and they made a decision here a while back to start living differently. See, they didn't want to be buried in debt anymore. So they enrolled in one of our Financial Peace University courses, and this is their story. Check it out.
When we told like the people in our FPU class, oh, we're debt free, so many people were so excited. And we were just kind of like numb.
But it shows you that if you're given the proper guidance and the proper tools, that you can achieve anything.
My name is Erin O'Hara.
And I'm DJ O'Hara.
And we live in Greenford, Ohio. We've been married for 5 years.
So I work for First National Bank. I'm a change management analyst for the bank.
I am a CPA, so numbers are my jam.
I thought we were okay with money because you're a CPA. And Aaron's like going through my statement saying like, oh, look, you spent sheets here, sheets there. You got a breakfast sandwich from here. You got boom, boom, boom. But I mean, like looking at that and seeing where our money was going, I'm like, oh my.
And Dave Ramsey has this quote of, if you don't tell your money where to go, you'll like wonder where it went. And that was like such the truth, because we didn't have a written budget. We didn't have a plan. And at the end of every month, we were always like, well, where'd all our money go? Like he was raised how to handle his money totally different from how I was raised on how to handle my money. So like going through FPU and learning, hey, you're a team, you're working together, you're making your budget together. You really get to know the people in the class. It was like, oh, then someone else is going to share and someone else is going to share. And once you are all kind of like in it together, something good happens. You achieve like your baby step, you saved your $1,000 or whatever. You're so excited for that person because you've shared so much. We started FPU in April of 2017. We had $160,200 of student loans plus a car loan. And we paid everything off by November of 2020. So it was like 44 months. We became debt-free.
Yeah. When you're making that last payment and like,
is this really it?
Is that it? Like, are we done? Like, I had them send us a letter.
Yeah.
I had them send us a letter saying, hey, your account is at zero.
Yeah. And I think it took a while for me to be like, oh, I can relax, we're not in debt anymore. We're not chained to these student loans for the rest of our life. They are gone and we're done. After we got out of debt, we were full speed ahead into saving for our house fund, and we got our house.
Yeah.
We've been moved in a week. We've had the house for about a month, so we've lived here officially for a little over a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's worth its weight in gold. Like it made our relationship stronger. It made us argue less. It made us understand who we are, and then made me understand Aaron even more than I already did. And I mean, just our decisions pre-Dave Ramsey to Dave Ramsey now is like, I mean, day and night, pushing it forward to, you know, once we start a family, showing our kids like, this is how you manage your money so they don't end up in the position where we were.
Do what he says to do. You can do anything for 9 weeks. Well, do it, go, be all in, and you won't regret that you did it.
Awesome story, right? See, when we get to make the decision to live differently, God can do some amazing things. But we have to make the decision to wage war on this stuff. And see, here are the facts. Our culture is hyper impulsive. Every day, multiple times a day, culture is telling us that we need more, that you have to have these certain things and you have to have this much stuff to be liked and to be noticed and to be fulfilled. But Jesus is actually saying, no, actually you don't. And hear me, everything Jesus is teaching us is contrary to what Madison Avenue and our culture is selling. Jesus' message is clear. Simplification leads to satisfaction. Simplification leads to satisfaction. See, the simpler your life is, the better your life is going to be. And I can remember when my grandfather was still living, he was very simple. He was a simple man. He was from Harlan, Kentucky, and he knew what hard work was, and he had 2 loves in this world, and those were my grandmother and his garden, okay? And when he passed away, I actually remember standing in his bedroom, staring into his closet, and there hung 3 pair of blue jeans, 2 gray sweatshirts, 2 blue Kentucky Wildcat sweatshirts, and a dress shirt. That was it. See, he always wore jeans and a white t-shirt unless it was cold outside, and then he would put on one of those sweatshirts. And our family still laughs at how simple he was, that he pretty much wore the same thing every day. But see, now that I'm almost 45 years old with 3 teenagers, let me tell you, I actually think it's brilliant. See, don't miss this. I'm not suggesting that you only have 3 pair of blue jeans and a few sweatshirts. However, I am suggesting that you choose what matters most, not what matters now. See, perhaps you have heard of him. I don't know. Most people actually haven't. His name is Ronald Wayne. Okay, he's an 87-year-old retired man who actually lives in Nevada. Now, what's interesting about Wayne is on April 1st of 1976, he, Steve Jobs, and Steve Wozniak founded a little company known as Apple Computer. Now, Wayne drew the first Apple logo, wrote the 3 men's original partnership agreement, and wrote the Apple I manual. And Wayne received 10% stake in Apple. Not a bad deal, right? But here's where the story takes a weird, crazy turn. Because of some personal liability and the high risk in this startup venture, less than 2 weeks later, on April 12th, 1976, Wayne sold his shares for a whopping $800 back to his partners. Now, had Wayne held on to his 10% stake in Apple Incorporated, do you have any idea what that would be worth today? It would have been worth a little over $200 billion. $200 billion. Bonkers crazy, right? And we all think, how in the world could somebody do something so crazy? Well, you ready for this? We said it earlier. Choose what matters most, not what matters now. See, Ronald Wayne at the time was the only one of the 3 partners who was married and had children. And with the stress and the risk of the venture, he decided that it wasn't what mattered most in his life. So he sold his shares for $800, and he did it intentionally. And then he moved on with his life. And when he was interviewed here not this long ago and asked why he sold it, he simply said this, don't miss this. If I had stayed with Apple, I probably would have ended up the richest man in the cemetery. See, this is a guy who was looking at what mattered most. And sometimes that isn't easy to do, right? So for this to begin to happen in our own lives, we must begin to see ourselves very differently. Now, I don't know if you have ever thought of it this way, but we're a lot like a pumpkin that is becoming a jack-o'-lantern, all right? If you have ever picked a pumpkin from the field and purchased or purchased one from a farmer's market, you know that there is no such thing as the perfect pumpkin, is there? The task when you get your pumpkin is to incorporate the pumpkin's imperfections into the design that you carve into it, right? You look at the pumpkin and then you begin to imagine what it can be. And next, you draw a face of some sort on it, and then you come to the first step in the actual transformation process of the pumpkin, which happens to also be the absolute messiest. You open it up, and you begin to scoop out all the nasty and slimy and smelly stuff inside, all the seeds and the goop and the goo. And then you begin to carve the face, okay? Or you begin to carve your design, which is no doubt a bit painful for the pumpkin. And then ultimately you replace all of the muck with a light that shines from within. And see, this is a picture of what God intends to do in our lives. He wants to take our distorted view of our image, our distorted view of our stuff and our brokenness, and He wants to replace it with His light shining in us so that we can give His light to others around us. And as we allow Christ to work in us and we strive to do His will, we begin to sense a higher calling, a calling to simplicity, a calling to faithfulness, a calling to generosity. And as this happens, we begin to look at ways that we can make a difference with our time and with our talents and with our resources. See, by pursuing good financial practices, we free ourselves from debt so that we are able to live on mission for Jesus Christ in our community. And when we are called to go, or we're called to do, or we're called to give, we can, because we're not financially bound to anybody else. Again, I'm not suggesting that we should never buy anything for ourselves. I'm not suggesting that we should not buy a new car or go on vacation or buy new clothes. I think we should enjoy a little bit of our life. What I am suggesting is that we get serious with the help from God to begin to take a hard look at how we actually use his resources that he blesses our lives with. See, Jesus asked a clarifying question that 99% of Americans actually cannot answer. And I want you to be able to answer this question. He asked this in Mark chapter 8, verse 36. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? See, I promise you, if you can answer that, you will not only know what matters most, but your life will be so much better. Let me pray for you. God, this morning, as we talk about wrestling with our appetites, and God, we realize that we're all broken. Everyone tuning in, myself included, that every one of us have appetites for things that are ultimately not healthy. And God, a lot of times those appetites cause us to spend money we don't have and to overextend ourselves with credit card debt and other things. And God, my prayer this morning is that we would begin to take a hard look at what you've blessed us with and to realize that what you've given us, we should slow down and actually enjoy and not be working so hard to acquire other things that we don't have. And God, many of us right now have more debt than we even care to want to admit. And I pray that maybe today we'll make the decision that we want to dig in and we want to put a plan together, whether that's Financial Peace University or whether that's putting a budget together or whatever it is for each individual, that they would begin to attack that debt to get rid of it so they can begin to live a more freed life. And God, that they're not slave to the lender, and that you would be able to use us, God, in mighty and powerful ways, that we would have money that we could enjoy a little bit of life with no stress, but then we would be free to be able to use the resources that you have blessed us with to make impact in the communities around us. Lord, we love you and we thank you for what you've blessed us with, and help us not to try to get everything we can out of this world and ultimately lose our soul. To focus on keeping the main thing. So Lord, help us do that. We love you and we praise you and we thank you for the life that you've given us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.